Chapter 5. There was a time when the screeching of my alarm clock was the rudest awakening I could get. But Bruno's whimpering combined with his continuous stirring was a close second. When I opened my eyes and looked around, I was again faced with a strange new environment. I probed my surroundings with my fingers as my brain booted up and I remembered where I was. The icy cold air discouraged any movement at all. "Bruno, 5 more minutes," I called, hoping he would go back to sleep. If I didn't move at all, I almost felt warm. The blankets immediately touching me were warm from my body heat, but beyond that they were bone-chilling. But the air in the small space was still colder, just a few degrees warmer than the water that surrounded the hull. I wasn't sure how long I had been out, but the pale light spilling in from the hatch of the cabin signaled it was time we pushed on. If it wasn't for Bruno's morning routine, I would have slept in just a little longer. When I mistakenly ignored Bruno's hints in the morning at my apartment, it resulted in him picking his own spot to go inside my place. Eager to not make that mistake again, I kicked off my blankets and got out of bed. The air had a bite that instantly woke me. Bruno circled impatiently as I climbed the steps out of the cabin and into the cockpit. "I'm coming," I said as I hooked up his leash. This time I managed to keep a tight grip on it as he circled with a panicked look on his face before finally hanging his parts over the edge of the boat. "Good boy," I told him as I shivered from the cold breeze. "You're lucky I didn't push you in for getting me out of bed so soon." Once on the deck of the boat, the air shifted from a freshwater scent to something burning. Toward the shore, I noticed smoke billowing up in the morning light, so much so that it almost filled the air like fog, making it seem later than it actually was. I made it out of the city and managed to get a good deal north before turning in for the night. But the black cloud of smoke on the horizon told me one thing: I hadn't gone nearly far enough. It was more than the smell of a simple wood fire. It was laced with a variety of different chemical smells from whatever building they were burning. A full night of rest had renewed my determination to get to my destination, so I immediately got to work pulling up the anchor and setting sail north. With the boat on its way, I sat down at the back and wrapped myself up in one of the blankets. As if on patrol, Bruno paced from the front cabin, staying just long enough to get comfortable on the bed, then ran back to where I sat at the helm and stared behind us. After observing our surroundings, he let out a few barks, then returned to the front cabin and repeated the process all over again. With the wind shifting, I had to spend most of my time at the helm of the boat, not solely relying on the autopilot. I envied the time Bruno got to spend down below, out of the elements and in the limited warmth the bedding had to offer. Despite our position on the water, I had the strange feeling we were being watched. At times, I could have sworn I saw something in the distance, in the same direction that Bruno was barking. But I swiftly brushed it off as paranoia and focused on coaxing as much speed as I could out of the sails. I was fairly certain we were long gone from any city, and slightly pleased with our progress. In a short time, there were cliffs sprouting on the horizon. The water's edge was free of any houses or buildings. I turned the wheel, adjusted the sails, and put the shore parallel to our port side. On Bruno's next patrol of our vessel, he did his usual turn about the cabin, then darted up to where I sat and barked toward the distance behind us, and stared longingly at the shore, no doubt looking forward to the time when we would return to it. Looking up at the top of the mast, I saw the wind had shifted again, and we were sailing almost downwind. I loosened the ropes on the jib and let it out to catch as much wind as possible. With the sails set, the boat picked up some of the lost speed. But as the sun set, the wind eventually died. Often the little heat generated by the sun's rays, even in late fall and early winter, was enough to generate wind. So naturally, as the sun's power faded, so did my only means of propulsion. I knew that wasn't always true, but it seemed to be the case the past few nights. This left me at a near standstill, surrounded by nothing but calm water. I couldn't help but wonder if I were a more proficient sailor, Would I be there already? From my position, I could barely see land in the failed light, and decided to make the best of the situation. I stood and tried to shake some warmth in my limbs as I again dropped the anchor and went below. I needed to relax and stop obsessing over what we were running from, how cold I was, or the simple fact that we were once again stationary. Even Bruno started to relax and took a break from his endless patrol of our tiny boat. It was amazing to me how just having him around helped my mood. I guess it was the thought of knowing that I was not going through this alone, and he was always there for me to bounce ideas off of. No matter what, he would always be at my side, even in impractical situations like getting on a boat. The past few days of traveling left me feeling grimy and in desperate need of a shower. I found the extra shirt and socks I had packed. After a little investigating, I found towels as well as some shampoo and conditioner. The shower on the boat was cramped, but thankfully the owner ordered his boat with a water heater. Despite the fact that the boat bobbed and weaved in small remaining waves that caused me to bump against the ice-cold walls of the stall, I lingered. I didn't care that the boat had a limited supply of power to run the small heater. The hot water washed away every worry, along with the smells I had accumulated during my journey. Even though it was cramped quarters, it felt like an undeserved luxury. I allowed my mind to drift as I breathed in the warm air, forgetting the rest of the world and all the problems in it for a moment. Once I finally felt warmed up, I reluctantly turned off the water and quickly got dressed. If I thought it was cold outside before, I was wrong when compared to scrubbing my pants and shirts while standing in my undies. I had counted on the fact that if I reached my uncle's house, my old clothes would most likely still be up there in storage. I had not accounted for them getting wet while working at the helm and getting splashed by the occasional wave. Once done, I hung them up in the shower to drip dry and reached for one of the plush robes and a pair of slippers. The owner must have been big on pampering himself because they had everything here to turn this rig into a 5-star resort when it was not being sailed. I sealed up the hatch in an attempt to trap as much heat in the boat as possible, as it wasn't necessary for me to be at the helm for a while. I rummaged through the cabinets in the galley and found a nice collection of champagne and fancy crackers that would do nicely for a makeshift dinner. Once I poured myself a glass, I sifted through the variety of CDs in the cabinet next to the stereo. Mixed in with other various titles was a personal favorite, Louis Prima. As a kid, I always was a fan of the movie The Jungle Book. It was my grandfather who played me my first Prima CD and explained it was the same musician who did the orangutan's voice, and I loved it ever since. After pressing play, I finally sat back in the plush white leather couch, kicked my feet up, and ached for the cheese and sausage. "So, what do you think, Bruno?" I asked as I emptied my glass of champagne, being sure to keep my pinky up. "I wonder what the poor people are doing today." Bruno just sat still like a perfect little angel, watching the plate of snacks disappear one piece at a time. Eventually, I got sick of him looking so sad and decided to share. "1 piece for you and 2 for me," I said, dividing up the rest. It was nice to have a break, kick back, and let my hair down. "Too bad we didn't have better company, hey, pal?" I said, taunting the poor dog. "But don't worry, I know you try real hard." I sang along with the CD. "And every time it rains pennies from heaven, shooby-dooby. Don't you know those clouds contain pennies from heaven?" Bruno got up and started to bark excitedly. "You'll see your fortune falling all over town," I continued. It was one of my favorites. "Hey, Bruno, why did the monkey fall out of the tree?" I asked while stuffing another piece of sausage in my mouth. "Because it was dead." Clearly, I was the only one who found that one funny. "Wow, pal, you gotta learn not to be so uptight. You know what I was doing this time last year?" I asked, taking a swig from the bottle. "I got a killer deal on an 8-day cruise that left out of New York. The night I left, there was a freak snowstorm that hit as we were leaving the harbor on our way to paradise. That didn't stop them from throwing a party, though. They had a salsa band playing and coats to a packed deck. Everyone was in the best of spirits despite the weather, But of course, why shouldn't they be? They were, after all, on vacation, and they just left all their worries and problems on shore. It was nice to be free from problems and stress. But the only thing I don't like about vacation is that no matter how long I'm gone or how much fun I have, they will be waiting for me when the boat finally returns to port. When I bought the tickets, it was on short notice, and I wasn't able to convince anyone to go with me. So I went by myself and had a blast. Everyone I met was chipper and happy. It was more like talking to old friends who I hadn't seen in a while, and less like we were all strangers. It was a party packed full of 100 of my closest friends. Anyway, by the end of the night, there was a huge conga line circling the pools, with me at the front. I had a maraca in each hand and was singing Hola Muchacha at the top of my lungs, followed by a shake, shake, shimmy. Bruno looked up at me with a newly formed slobber bubble on the left side of his face. And now, I'm freezing my caboose off with you. If I never see your owners again, I'm going to release you into the wild. Bruno stood up and started to head back to the bed where he was earlier. Just think, you could run free and feel the wind in your fur and catch rabbits. Doesn't that sound nice? If you want, I could pull this rig over and toss you out. You could get started on that now if you want. A bit of advice if you find yourself in a situation that seems daunting. Just remember that deep down you are part wolf. If I see your owners, I'll cover for you. I'll just tell them that you ran away. I stopped rambling as even Bruno walked away, disinterested in my empty threats. I paced around the small boat, but feeling cramped, I eventually ventured back to the cockpit, ping-ponging off the walls as I went and blaming the waves for my lack of balance rather than the booze. I took a good long look at the night sky peppered with stars. Somehow it seemed bigger than usual. Maybe it was the lack of clouds or because there were no streetlights. Or maybe I never took the time to fully appreciate it. The night was not completely without light. Even though the sun retired behind the horizon, the full moon made it possible to see my surroundings. Without the smell of the fires, and not being able to see the state of things on land, I tried to imagine it was all a dream. I tried to rationalize what I had seen on my way through. I convinced myself my mind was playing tricks on me. In the back of my head, I knew things might never return to normal. Weighing out the risks of going to my uncle's, I failed to think of a better plan. What I would do if he was nowhere to be found, or if he turned me away. I had risked so much out of desperation. I was determined to make an attempt at improving my odds versus starving in my dumpy apartment. One thing was for sure. Even with the high thread count of this bathrobe, it was still rather drafty, all out in the open like I was. I drained the bottle of champagne and stuffed a handwritten note in it that said, "Sorry the bottle's empty." After sealing the top with the cork as best I could, I lofted the bottle overboard. I stared at it as it drifted away for a few minutes. Then I slowly climbed back down into the cabin. Returning to the galley with my spirits brought back down to earth, I realized that I should get to bed so I could try and get back to a normal schedule of being awake during the day and sleeping at night. Despite the sleep I got the previous night, my body's schedule still felt a little off. I went through the closets in the main cabin and found a pair of really nice sweatpants and a long-sleeved shirt. I did my nightly routine of brushing my teeth and flossing, after which I walked around the boat and turned off every light possible. After climbing into bed and pulling the luxurious covers over me, I tried to get comfortable. Bruno moved over and rested his warm head on my leg, using it as a makeshift pillow. The warming effects from the alcohol, combined with the rocking of the waves, relaxed me to the point where I felt myself drift off into sleep after yet another exhausting day. Sleep, however, no longer provided the escape it once did. My nightmares robbed me of rest and were fueled by the very real horrors witnessed during the past few days. I relived the soldiers carrying out their orders as they continually fed the fires. Not with those who just lost their fight to the flu, but with the frail bodies that once represented someone's daughter, wife, or grandfather. Before long, I was rocked awake by the waves against the hull. Glancing at my watch, I found that I had only been asleep for a couple of hours. Through the hatch in the ceiling, I could see that it was not yet light out, but I knew that it would be soon. After lying there for a few minutes, I realized something was missing. "Bruno?" I said to myself in disbelief. "Good. Finally, I have the bed to myself." I rolled onto my side and fluffed my pillow as I tried to get comfortable. Confused as to his whereabouts, I let out a whistle and yelled for him. When I got no reply, I tried again. "Bruno, bedtime." In my experience, when a dog or a small child was completely silent and did not come when called, they were usually up to no good. After even more time passed, my curiosity got the best of me, so I kicked off the covers and started walking across the cold floor to see what Bruno had gotten into. In the cockpit, I found Bruno with his front paws up on the side of the boat and his undivided attention at the darkness beyond what I could see. "What is it?" I peered out over the water. To me, it looked the same as always, just the glint of moonlight on the water up against a star-filled sky. Bruno wasn't just a dog. He was actually two dogs. As weird as it sounds, it was true. There was the dog I knew, the playful mess of a beast always begging for food and sneaking into my bed. And then there was the other one. Whenever he was on watch or suspicious, he was a completely different animal. His ears went forward, and his chest puffed up. The hair on his neck stood straight, and his mood completely changed. At that point, nothing would snap him out of his funk until whatever had caught his attention was either neutralized or thoroughly inspected to his satisfaction. It was then I could understand how such a fun-loving dog could be what everyone else saw him as. Not just a guard dog, but a security system who couldn't easily turn off. Even when he was asleep, he was always on watch. I couldn't get up at night to go to the bathroom without him tagging along. I heard it before I saw it. Chatter across the water in the distance. I studied the horizon in the direction of the sound, and as the boat bobbed and dipped in the waves, I saw what I thought were lights from multiple boats. Just for a minute, I saw a group of them flickering on and off as they disappeared behind the waves. Bruno let out a low, long growl before a loud bark that was as bad as some bites. From what I could make out, it seemed as though they were searching the water for something. I had no idea who they were or what kind of a boat they were on, but one thing was for sure: I didn't want to find out. "I understand, Bruno. It is time to go." After pulling up the anchor, I let loose the rope attached to the roller furling and heard the Genoa unravel in the soft breeze, and the boat began to heel over slightly once again. "We can't afford to make friends," I said, turning the wheel and heading north. "We have to get out of here." When the sun came up, our white sails would be a beacon for anyone to spot us, so it was in our best interest to make good use of what little remained of the night. At water level, it was sometimes hard to see over the waves, almost making the horizon look closer than it actually was. But the mast on this boat was over 30 feet tall. It would most certainly be visible at a distance, even without the giant white sails. I gathered the thickest blanket on the boat and a pillow from the bed, then headed up top for what was going to be a long day. I propped myself on one of the couches with Bruno and nestled in. Keeping an ever-watchful eye on the lights on the horizon, we sat and waited to greet the morning while we slowly crept a little farther. This had now become a waiting game. All I could do was hope that the wind would pick up and get us far enough away from the other boats before the sun came up. With any luck, we'd be able to go about our business unnoticed. I should have known that we wouldn't be the only ones with the idea to sit this thing out on the water. Sadly and painfully, my plan was moving along slower than anticipated, and now my food rations were in jeopardy. How I longed for a motorboat.